What is up? Welcome to the Vocal Delay and Reverb Masterclass. This is Jake Codeweiss with Musician on a Mission, and here's what you're going to learn in this lesson. How to get the vocal to sit well in the mix, how to create a sense of width, how to fix a washed out vocal so it sounds clearer in the mix, and how to add obvious creative effects with vocal delay and reverb. Let's jump in. First, why might you want to use delay and reverb on your vocals in the first place? A couple main reasons. One, to create a more subtle sense of space or depth to get the vocal to really kind of sit nicely in the mix. And two, to add more obvious creative effects for things like filling space in the mix, getting a specific vibe, and so on. We're going to talk about all these things as we move through the lesson. And in this masterclass, we're going to be bussing our delays and reverbs rather than inserting them directly on the track. So why might you want to do that? Basically because it allows for more flexibility when it comes to tone shaping and further techniques you're going to learn about today. So let's start with how to get the vocal to sit well in the mix. And the problem is that you might feel like your vocal is isolated, like it doesn't quite fit in with the rest of the instrumentation, almost like it sits on top of the mix, or maybe it feels like it sits way out in front of everything else. Like it's not a part of the band, or it's not a part of the backing track. So let's talk about solutions. What are some ways you can fix this issue and get that vocal to really sink in and feel like it's more of a part of the track? First, you could rebalance the vocal. Ask yourself, can you simply turn the volume of your vocal up or down so it sits better in the mix? I like to start with the simplest solution first, and sometimes that just means tweaking a fader a little bit. So just something to think about. Next, you could use a short reverb to give the listener the impression that the vocal is sitting in a physical space. So let's open up the DAW. I want to show you an example of what this might look like. Let's go to this here. Right, we've just got a couple stems here, instruments, and then the dry lead only. Let's take a listen.
Are you mine? Is it all in my mind? Do you love me forever? Is it just a matter of time?
Right, dry vocal, isolated from the rest of the mix. So let's add a short reverb here to get it to kind of sit a little bit better in a sense of space here. Going to go ahead, I'm going to create a new bus. I'm going to name it short verb. And I'm going to pick my favorite reverb plugin. And I'm going to bring up just a basic short reverb that I like to use on vocals. Let's see here. Let's do small vox.
Are you mine? Is it all in my mind?
Now, that's a pretty obvious effect, right? So we just kind of want to blend this in so it's really more felt than heard, okay? So let's do that now.
Are you mine? Is it all in my mind? Do you love me forever? Is it just a matter of time? Are you mine? Do we need to rewind? Do you love me whatever our bodies together entwined?
Right? Just kind of adding a sense of width and a sense that that vocal's actually sitting in a space. And I'll solo the vocal so you can really kind of hear what's going on here.
Are you mine? Is it all in my mind?
Versus.
Do you love me forever? Is it just a matter of time? Are you mine?
Right? Now let's listen in context.
Are you mine? Is it all in my mind? Do you love me forever? Is it just a matter of time?
So a couple things to keep in mind here. When I say a short reverb, I generally mean anything really kind of lower than 1 second decay time. All right, so here you can see we've got 700 milliseconds. You're just going to have to really kind of experiment with decay time to see how it kind of like bounces with the track. We can actually probably bring this down a little bit. But it's really just a matter of preference, right? It's a matter of how it kind of moves and breathes with the tempo.
Are you mine? Is it all in my mind? Do you love?
I'm going to bring it up so I can really kind of hear what's going on, then I'll blend it back in.
Are you mine? Is it all in my mind? Do you love me forever? Is it just a matter of time? Are you mine?
So what I'm kind of listening for here is the decay, the reverb disappearing during Are You Mine, right? Are you mine? So I want it to decay all the way before the word you, right? After the word are and before the word you. Kind of just filling that little bit of a space. That's how I'm thinking about this reverb in a more musical way.
Are you mine?
Right? And you can hear that we've got that. It just decays pretty much all the way in between those lyrics.
Are you mine?
Obviously, this is going to be different from song to song. It really kind of depends on what's going on in the mix. So there's no real kind of one size fits all here, but just as a general rule of thumb, think about short reverb as being anything below 1 second decay time and time it to the tempo of the track. So it's breathing and pumping with the track.
Are you mine?
Let's blend that in.
Are you mine? Are you mine? Is it all in my mind? Do you love me forever? Is it just a matter of time? Are you mine? Do we need to rewind? Do you love me whatever our bodies together entwined? Are you mine?
All right, and how subtle you are with this technique, again, it's just kind of based on preference, right? Just keep in mind that this is one of those techniques that create depth and a little bit of width just so the vocal sits nicely in the mix. This is one of those subtle techniques, more felt than heard. That's really kind of the key phrase here. Next way you can get that vocal to kind of really sit well in the mix, you could use a short delay to accomplish the same thing. Give the listener the impression that the vocal is sitting in a physical space. And the main difference here is that delay just sounds a little bit different. It can be cleaner and it can sit better in a more dense arrangement. But again, and you're going to kind of see this as a consistent theme here, I encourage you to experiment. Experiment with both short reverbs and short delays just to see what you like better and what kind of fits best in the mix. Let's take a look at what a short delay might look like. Create a new aux track. I'm going to say short delay. I'm going to bring up a delay plugin. Short, yeah, let's start with the 16th note for now, and we'll kind of mess around with this. I just want the lowest feedback, so just a single echo happening here. And we'll make sure we're routed correctly. Let's dial this in. Let's see what we got.
Are you mine? Is it all in my mind?
Okay, nice and short. I think 16th note works fairly well. And again, we're just going to kind of dial this in so that it's more felt than heard.
Are you mine? Is it all in my mind? Do you love me forever? Is it just a matter of time? Are you mine? Do we need to rewind? Do you love me whatever our bodies together entwined? Are you
right? So when we have this short delay on, really kind of sits the vocal into a space, right? Brings some dimension, sits it well in the mix.
Are you mine? Is it all in my mind? Do you love me forever? Is it just a matter of time?
Let's compare that against the short verb.
Are you mine? Is it all in my mind? Do you love me forever? Is it just a matter of time? Are you mine? Do we need to rewind? Do you love me whatever our bodies together entwined?
See, so both of these really kind of accomplish the same thing. It gives the listener a perception of a physical space, but they do it in a slightly different way, and they have their own kind of slightly different sounds. Again, there's no real kind of right answer or one size fits all answer here. You just gotta kind of play around with these to see what kind of sits best and what you prefer for your mix. Next, you could add a longer reverb to kind of smooth out the vocal and create some depth and vibe. So I actually like the short reverb for this vocal, so I'm going to keep that there. And then I'm going to put in a long verb. Use the same plugin, but choose maybe a medium hall, a longer decay. Let's see what we got.
Are you mine? Is it all in my mind?
Right, so that's obviously an exaggerated example. Right, first I'm going to set a decay time here. And I think you can think of longer verbs, decay time anyway, as anything longer than a second, right? Just as a general rule of thumb. So here I'm going to dial it in, and again, just kind of dial in a decay time that kind of breathes with the track that's longer than a second.
Are you mine? Is it all in my mind? Do you love me forever? Is it just a matter of time? Are you mine? Do we need to rewind? Do you love me whatever our bodies together entwined?
I like that about right there. That's fine. Again, you'll just have to experiment with different reverb types. Now let's blend this into taste. And the objective here is to just kind of create kind of this smoothing of the vocal, bring in a little bit more depth, and create some vibe with it.
Are you mine? Is it all in my mind? Do you love me forever? Is it just a matter of time? Are you mine? Do we need to rewind? Do you love me whatever our bodies together entwined? Are you mine?
I like that right there. Let's listen without and then with.
Are you mine? Is it all in my mind? Do you love me forever? Is it just a matter of time? Are you mine? Do we need to rewind?
Really, really nice. Kind of fills in a lot of the space, and it creates that depth, creates that vibe that I feel like this song really kind of calls for. And it's not in an overly obvious way. Again, this is just kind of a subtle, more felt than heard kind of way. We might even dial this back a little bit more.
Are you mine? Are you mine? Is it all in my mind? Do you love me forever? Is it just a matter of time?
Let's bypass both of them.
Are you mine? Is it all in my mind?
See, that vocal is clearly isolated there, and it's not really kind of sitting well on the track. Now with our reverbs.
Are you mine? Is it all in my mind? Do you love me forever? Is it just a matter of time? Are
next solution to really kind of get your vocals to sit well in the mix, consider shaping the tone of your wet effects. And when I say wet effects, it just means reverbs and delays, time-based effects like that. So you can use EQ to dial in your reverbs and delays even further to get everything sitting nicely in the mix. And I'll show you what this looks like. So let's just take our long reverb, for example. Some reverb plugins have EQs built right into it. Like this one's got a low band, a mid band, and a high band. You kind of shape the tone this way. Right? But I like to add an EQ after the track or after the insert and shape it with a separate plugin just because it's the way I prefer to do it. It's the way I've always done it, and it gives me a little bit more flexibility. So how might I shape this reverb in the mix? Let's take a listen.
Are you mine? Is it all in my mind? Do you love me forever?
I might decide that I don't want any low end coming into this reverb, or this reverb really kind of contributing any low end information to the mix. So I might just pull in a high pass here just to keep this area clear.
Are you mine?
It's also a little on the bright side for me. So maybe I want this vocal to feel a little bit darker. Well, I might roll off some of the high end. All right. The shelf or a filter. The point is you can use EQ to shape the tone of that verb, whether it's your short verbs, your long verbs, any of your wet effects.
Are you mine? Is it all in my mind?
So let's roll off the high end a little bit.
Are you mine? Is it all in my mind? Do you love me forever? Is it just a matter of time? Are you mine? Do we need to rewind? Do you love me whatever our bodies together entwined?
So I like that right there. Just kind of making that reverb a little bit darker. Gradual roll off here so that only kind of the mid range is poking through.
Are you mine? Is it all in my mind? Do you love me forever? Is it just a matter of time? Are you mine? Do we need to rewind?
Right? Just dialing in the tone of that reverb a little bit more. Is there anything we would do on our short reverb? Oh, let's check. Let's see.
Are you mine? Is it all in my mind?
I might do the same thing, roll off a little bit of the highs here, just to make it just a little bit duller and darker.
Are you mine? Is it all in my mind? Do you love me forever? Is it just a matter of time? Are you mine? Do we need to rewind? Do you love me whatever?
And if this short reverb is creating any kind of buildup in any of the frequency spectrum at all, right? Kind of maybe in the
Are you
200 to 300 range. And this is going to be different depending on what your source material is. But you can kind of attack that here in this stage. Right? If when you add your reverbs, you start to get a little bit of buildup in whichever range, right? In this case, I'm hearing a little bit of buildup right here. That's kind of amplifying this range of the frequency spectrum. Well, you can cut that out. You can shape the tone of that reverb so you don't get that buildup, but you still get the effect, right?
Are you mine? Is it all in my mind? Do you love me forever? Is it just a matter of time? Are you?
Now, I just want to be very clear here that this isn't something that I will do with every single wet effect. It's this technique where I'm rolling off the lows and rolling off the highs. I know a lot of guys who just do this religiously without thinking about it. I like to think about what's actually going on in the mix first and ask myself questions like, okay, is this long reverb contributing to a high-end buildup, or is it making the vocal sound brighter than I want it to sound? Yes, only then will I apply my filter on the high end, right? It's not something I just automatically do. So just the practice of mixing with intention and how that's a pretty important thing to do, right? Everything kind of depends on what's going on in context with the rest of the mix. It's all about relationships here. So the point is, the main takeaway here is that you can shape the tone of your reverb to get that vocal to sit better in the mix and to make sure that your reverb isn't creating any buildup in any specific areas. You have total control of that by adding an EQ after the insert. Next, let's talk about how to create a sense of width. And the goal here is just to make the vocal more interesting to listen to by filling in the left to right space of the stereo field using wet effects. Right? So what are some ways you can do this? First, you could use a short reverb to create a sense of space around the vocal without pushing it further back in the mix, like a longer reverb might, right? And we've already kind of gone over how to do this. Using a short reverb can help get your vocal to sit well in the mix, but it also doubles as a way to create a little bit of width. Next, you could use a stereo delay where you dial in slightly different timings on the left and the right channels. Let's add a new bus. And I'm going to call this stereo delay. We're going to add delay plugin. We're going to start with 16th note.
Are you mine? Is it all in my mind? Do you love me forever? Is it just a matter of time?
So right now I've just got a 16th note delay going right up the center. Let's play around with these. Let's unlink this. And I'm going to put a delay on one side, on the left side, and a slightly different timing on the right side. Let's go ahead, and I'm actually going to put this into milliseconds rather than sync it with the tempo. It's just a little bit easier to do. So maybe I'll just take down the right side a little bit.
Are you mine? Is it all in my mind? Do you love me forever? Is it just a matter of time? Are you mine? Do we need to rewind?
Listen to all that width.
Are you mine?
Let's just go dry. And I'm only going to pop in the stereo delay.
Are you mine? Is it all in my mind?
All right. Now, obviously, that's an exaggerated example. We might just blend that into taste.
Are you mine? Are you mine? Is it all in my mind? Do you love me forever? Is it just a matter of time? Are you mine? Do we need to rewind? Do you love me whatever our bodies together entwine?
And you can be as subtle or obvious with this kind of effect as you want to be. You could use this effect to replace your short reverb, or you can use this in conjunction. It's really up to you. Experiment, see what works for you, see what works for the mix. And I might sculpt the tone of this a little bit also.
Are you mine? Is it all?
So inside of this particular delay plugin, there are high pass filters and low pass filters. You can use them directly in the plugin, or you can use a separate EQ. Totally up to you. This one I'm going to use inside the plugin. I'll roll off up to 500 here and then to 4K here. Let's play with it.
Are you mine? Is it all in my mind?
So you can hear really kind of like the tss come in, right? The sibilance. And maybe we want to tame that a little bit. Maybe I just kind of want to tame the high end and make it a little bit darker.
Are you mine? Is it all in my mind? Do you love me forever? Is it just a matter of time? Are you mine? Do we need to rewind? Do you love me whatever our bodies together entwine?
And let's actually bring the feedback down because it's repeating too much for me, right? Let's just do a single feedback.
Are you mine? Is it all in my mind? Do you love me forever? Is it just a matter of time? Are you mine? Do we need to rewind?
Again, more just kind of felt than heard, using this in a very kind of subtle way. Totally up to you on how you want to use this technique. Just one way to bring in some width and fill out that left to right information. Next, you could use a ping pong delay to alternate the delay from the left and the right channels. So I'm going to use the stereo delay track we set up and dial this in for a ping pong. Let's do a 16th note. And I'll select the ping pong button here. Let's just see what that sounds like.
Are you mine? Is it all in my mind?
So you can hear it's kind of cascading from the left channel to the right channel.
Are you mine?
See what happens when we turn up the feedback a little bit.
Are you mine? Are you mine?
Really kind of cool effect.
Are you mine?
Let's blend it in.
Are you mine? Is it all in my mind? Do you love me forever? Is it just a matter of time? Are you mine? Do we need to rewind? Do you love me whatever our bodies together entwine?
Again, you can make it as obvious or as subtle as you want. I like that right there. I think that's cool to have kind of like a short delay. So I'm just going to say 16th ping pong. Right. And you can make this longer too, right? Play around with the times to kind of see where it sits in the mix. This is a dotted 16th note, right? Let's try full.
Are you mine? Is it all in my mind? Do you love me forever? Is it just a matter of time? Are you mine?
Let's try 8th note.
Are you mine? Is it all in my mind? Do you love me forever? Is it just a matter of time? Are you mine?
I really like how that 8th note kind of moves along with the rhythm and sits that vocal in the mix. That sounds good to me. So just another option. Next, let's talk about fixing a washed out vocal. Right? And the problem here is usually an imbalance between the dry vocal and the reverb or the delay. So there are a few things you can do here. First, you could try to rebalance your wet effects. Right? Simplest solution first. Can you turn down your reverbs or delays so that the vocal just cuts through the mix a little bit better? Next, you could try a different reverb. Experiment with different reverb types and pick the one that kind of allows the vocal to cut through the most. Play with rooms, halls, plates, get a feel for these different types and create your own list of preferences. Next, try shaping the tone of your wet effects. This is something we already talked about, but use EQ to cut frequencies in the reverb or the delay that might be masking the vocal. Right? And just a quick tip here, keep an eye on the upper mids around the 1K to 6K range, because this is where a lot of vocal clarity and presence lives. And you may be able to clean up the vocal by cutting this area on your wet effects. This isn't a one-size-fits-all solution. Really, it depends on your vocal and your reverb and everything else you've got going on in the mix. But masking in the upper mids specifically, just something to be aware of. So for example, if you're losing some intelligibility on the lead, then you might kind of look at this area right here. Look to see what's going on in this area, and maybe you can carve out a little bit of space for your vocal here. Again, I can't tell you that this is going to work every time because it depends on the source material. But just wanted to show you an example of what that might look like. Next, you could try using pre-delay on your reverbs to separate the dry signal from the wet signal, which can help push the vocals forward a little bit more in the mix. For example, if you've got a long reverb here, let's see.
Are you mine?
I'm going to mute our other wet effects, and we're just going to kind of stick with our long reverb. And this plugin has a pre-delay knob. A lot of reverbs do. You could use this knob to separate the wet signal from the dry signal.
Are you mine?
So I'm going to tell the reverb to wait 80 milliseconds, 84.1 milliseconds before it activates.
Are you mine? Is it all in my mind?
Let's exaggerate a little bit more.
Are you mine? Is it
Right? So it's basically a delay. It just delays the reverb a little bit. So if the vocal's getting buried from your reverbs, try to play around with the pre-delay times a touch.
Are you mine? Is it all in my mind? Do you love me forever? Is it just a matter of time? Are you mine?
And then without pre-delay,
Are you mine?
and then with.
Are you mine?
Right? Just kind of keeps the vocal a little bit further up front. So experiment with this. This is a setting that can make a big difference for helping the intelligibility of a vocal. Next, you can try using sidechain compression to automatically duck the volume of your wet effects whenever the vocal is present. Let's say you've got a longer reverb here and you want it a little bit more obvious just in the gaps of the lyrics rather than kind of washing out the vocal. So let's kind of dial that in.
Are you mine? Are you?
Right, dialing in just a little bit more obvious. And then we're going to add some compression. I'm going to sidechain this to the vocal. Our dry lead. I'm going to go fastest attack, fastest release for now. I'm going to set that in just a minute. And let's set the threshold.
Are you mine? Is it all in my mind? Do you love me forever? Is it just a matter of time? Are you mine?
So what's going on here is this compressor is automatically ducking the volume of the long reverb when the vocal is present. And then in the gaps, it releases that reverb so that it comes forward in the mix. I'm just going to solo the vocal so you can hear what's going on.
Are you mine? Is it all in my mind?
Right? And then you can set the timing of the release so that it kind of breathes with the track and moves with the tempo of the song.
Are you mine? Is it all in my mind? Do you love me?
And you can make this effect a little bit more obvious. Ratio.
Are you mine? Is it all in my mind?
Right? So the reverb just kind of slowly fades in automatically in the gaps of the lyrics. So when the vocal's actually present, it's a little bit more intelligible and you're kind of fixing that washiness. It just makes it a little clearer, improving clarity.
Are you mine? Is it all in my mind?
And then without.
Are you mine? Is it all in my mind? just a matter of time? Are you mine? Do we need to rewind? Do you love me whatever our bodies together entwined? Are you mine?
Again, you can be as obvious or as subtle with this as you need to be, whatever the mix calls for, whatever you prefer. So next, let's talk about adding obvious creative effects with delay and reverb. And again, the goal here isn't really to fix problems. It's more about identifying opportunities where you might be able to make the vocal more interesting. So some things you could try. You could stack delays and reverbs to create a more ambient effect. For example, let's dial in a little bit more of a subtle long reverb here.
Are you mine?
That sounds fine. And then let's go back to our 8th ping pong. I'm going to increase the rate.
Are you mine? Is it all in my mind?
Right? Pretty cool. I'm going to make that a little bit more obvious.
Are you mine? Is it all in my mind?
Now, delay is pretty cool. I like that. But let's make it a little bit more ambient with some reverb. I'm going to use my favorite reverb plugin. And, I'm just going to do a medium hall. And stack this after the delay. Let's hear how that sounds.
Are you mine? Is it all in my mind?
Very cool. So much more obvious, much more ambient, kind of ghostly sounding. I'll dial in the decay a little bit.
Are you mine? Is it all in my mind? Do you love me forever? Is it just a matter of time? Are you mine?
And then might just play with the dry wet signal a touch.
Are you mine? Is it all in my mind? Do you love me forever? Is it just a matter of time?
Just delay first.
Are you mine? Is it all in my mind?
Right? Really kind of clean delay happening, and then we slap some reverb on afterwards.
Are you mine? Is it all in my mind?
Just to push it back, give it some wetness, just kind of creating a different texture.
Are you mine? Is it all in my mind? Do you love me forever? Is it just a matter of time?
Right? And you can shape the tone of all this too, if you wanted to, right?
Are you mine? Is it all in my mind? Do you love me forever? Is it just a matter of time? Are you mine? Do we need to rewind? Do you love me whatever our bodies together entwined? Are you mine? Are you mine? Is it all in my mind? Do you love me forever? Is it just a matter of time?
Next, you can try using reverb and delay throws to pull the listener's attention during gaps in lyrics, gaps in lyrical phrases. So rather than having a delay effect that kind of rides all the way through the vocal, you would pick and choose individual places to just do a single echo or a single vocal delay, right? That's a throw delay or a throw verb. And there are many different ways you can do this. You can automate an insert directly onto the track, so it just bypasses and activates as you need it to. You can automate a bus to turn on and off just for specific words or specific sections. I personally like to create brand new tracks for throw delays. right? So I'll show you what this looks like. So I have a dry vocal here, and then I'm going to name this throw delay. I'm going to take all my buses off of that throw delay track. I don't need them there. And basically, I'll just copy all the processing over from the dry lead onto the throw delay track. And I will add an insert directly on the throw delay track. So let's say, got a delay plugin, single feedback at, let's just say, quarter note for now. We're probably going to dial that in. And then I will do some editing here.
Are you mine? Is it all in my mind?
So that my mind, I'm going to turn off our ping pong delay just for sake of example here. So let's say I just want this part to repeat. My mind. I'll actually grab this and copy it down to my throw delay track. And let's hear what that sounds like.
My mind.
Right? That's it. I've got this delay on 100% wet. Right? I've got the mix on 100% wet. So when this plays through, it's going to repeat.
Is it all in my mind?
Now let's play with the timing a little bit so it sits better with the track. Try a half note.
All in my mind.
All right, maybe up the feedback.
Is it all in my mind?
Let's do a little bit more. And then, I don't know, let's do some ping pong.
Is it all in my mind? Do you love it?
All right. Now let's make it a little bit more, I don't know, let's make it a little bit more ghostly. I'll stack a reverb on to that throat track. Again, I want just kind of like a longer haul reverb. We'll put the wet dry at 50. See what we got.
Is it all in my mind?
It's way too obvious. To dial that in, I'm just going to bring down the volume of the throat delay track.
Is it all in my mind? Do you love? Is it all in my mind? Do you love me forever? Is it just a matter of time?
Cool, right? So just having an extra track just for throws, this is actually something that I will set up ahead of time. And then I don't have to mess with automation or anything like that. I can just do a little bit of creative editing when the thought kind of strikes me and just copy down a section of the vocal.
Do we need to rewind? Do you love me whatever our bodies together entwined? Are you mine?
Right? So that's just an example of a throw delay with a little bit of reverb on it. You could do the same thing with reverb effects, right? Maybe you just want a reverb throw where the reverb is a little bit more obvious on a specific word. You know, rather than this kind of like obvious repeating kind of thing, you just kind of want one word or maybe a couple words at the end of a phrase that just kind of ring out. Let's do that.
In my mind.
All right, and let's make it really obvious. I'm just going to jack up the decay time. And also make it 100% wet.
In my mind.
All right, so it's just that one word that kind of gets the reverb.
In my mind.
Right? Maybe not that obvious.
In my mind. Do you love in my mind?
It really rings out. You'd have to experiment with a reverb that works here. This one obviously doesn't work very well with the track. Let's try this large church. That's a long reverb, right? 5-second decay time, but it might work. Let's see.
Is it all in my mind? Do you love me for
Really cool kind of effect, right? Just kind of ringing out on that one word. Well, just another way you can strategically add wet effects to fill in space and make things a little bit more interesting. And again, you don't have to use this method either, where you just create new tracks and add inserts directly onto the tracks. You can do this however you want. You can use automation to turn buses on and off, or affect send levels up and down, or you can add an insert directly onto the track and just turn it on and off, use automation, turning it on and off, do it that way. Totally up to you. The point is, I want you to come away from this lesson with the strategy to use a throw, and how you do it, completely up to you. Whatever makes the most sense for your brain. Next, and we already talked about this a little bit, you could use sidechain compression to duck obvious and heavily processed wet effects. So earlier on, we talked about this in the context of a more subtle use of reverb to create more of a vibe and a smoothness in the track and fix a washed up vocal, create a little bit more intelligibility. The only difference here would be how obvious the actual effect is. So let's just quickly take a look at that in the DAW. Let's add sidechain compression to our ping pong, like a longer ping pong delay.
are you mine? Is it all in my mind? Do you love me forever? Is it just a
Let's say I just kind of want this really obvious ping pong delay to come in during the gaps in the vocals. Just add some sidechain compression. We'll sidechain it to the dry lead. Turn off these auto settings. Fastest attack. Let's dial this in.
Are you mine? Is it all in my mind? Do you love me forever? Is it just a matter of time? Are you mine? Do we need to rewind? Do you love me whatever our bodies together entwine? Are you mine? Is it all in my mind? Do you love me forever? Is it just a matter of time? Are you mine? Do we
Right? Just kind of automatically filling in the gaps without sidechain compression.
Are you mine? Is it all in my mind?
And then with.
Are you mine? Is it all in my mind?
And finally, experiment. Right? This is kind of the general theme. This is the thing I've been saying over and over and over again in this lesson. Make sure to just try different types of delays and reverbs, stack different plugins, and have fun with it. The more you do this, the more you'll amass a list of your own kind of preferences and your own kind of techniques. So I know we covered a lot in this lesson. Here's a recap of everything that we talked about. Feel free to pause the video, take a screen cap of this little cheat sheet. What are some of your favorite vocal delay and reverb tips? Let me know in the comments. Obviously, there's much more than just vocal reverb and delay to getting your music to sound professional. So if you're ready to learn how to go from hobbyist to pro as quickly as possible, make sure to join me for the free training by following the link in the description. If you liked the video, hit the like button, subscribe to learn more about mixing and music production. Thanks for watching, and may your next mix be your best mix yet. See ya!